Welcome to your Dairy Checkoff podcast, where we discuss checkoff programming with industry experts and your dairy promotion staff, both locally and nationally. I'm Allison Ryan, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communication for MVP Dairy located in Salina, Ohio. And joining me today is Heather Oldani. She is the head of Communication, Marketing, and Affair at DMI. We're going to be discussing the See Dairy Differently campaign that promotes dairy farmer sustainability to influential audiences. And Heather, before we dive into that, can you tell us a little bit more about your role at DMI?
Sure, and thanks, Allison, for having me today. I have been with DMI for just over 6 years, and in my current role, I oversee our marketing, communications, and affairs team, which is a long way of saying we are the team that has the privilege, I would say, to take Dairy Story to market. And by that, I mean taking Dairy Story to consumers, early parents specifically, and young adults and teens, as well as then taking our story to those influential thought leaders that are influencing consumer beliefs and perceptions about dairy. So think about sustainability NGOs, health professionals, pediatricians, etc. So we have a team of about 30 that works hard on your behalf every day to make sure that we are building trust for dairy and dairy products, as well as then coordinating with our 16 state and regional marketing teams to make sure that we are scaling that story to consumers and thought leaders around the country.
That's great. How long have you been there?
I've been with DMI for a little over 6 years. I came from an agency background, and I also had kind of a similar role at McDonald's US, representing their story to consumers and thought leaders on their marketing team.
That's great. So you've seen a little bit of a different consumer look beyond what we're doing here in our dairy community. So, there are so many topics that really come to mind when we're talking about, okay, what are we going to share with consumers? We can talk animal care, we can talk dairy nutrition, food safety. What is it about sustainability that makes it such a hot button issue among consumers?
Yeah, it's been interesting looking at the data over the years. And one thing that we do consistently at DMI is that we track consumer perceptions year over year. And I would say, to the question of do consumers care about sustainability, I would say unequivocally, yes, they do care about environmental sustainability. Taking that one step further, they care about climate change and water conservation. So if you think about the weather that we've all been experiencing over the last years, I think what's making it come home for consumers is that they are experiencing it in their daily life. Hottest summers on record, right? I live here in Chicago. It's been the warmest spring or warmest February on record here in Chicago. And I think for consumers, once they start to experience those impacts of climate change personally, it continues to rise in terms of importance for them. We just saw a latest consumer data poll that looked at what's on top of mind concern for people here and around the world. And it was really interesting. Number one was war, right? Given the conflicts that we see happening around different parts of the globe. Right behind that was water conservation. And then shortly thereafter in fourth place was climate change. And so they do care, and it's becoming an increasing concern for them. Taste and nutrition still reign paramount when they're looking to make their purchasing decisions, as well as cost. But they do have that factor in the back of their mind on what can I continue to do to be more sustainable in my own life.
So, sustainability, you mentioned a couple different key points in there, climate change being one. And, it can be such a broad conversation. And where do we, as a dairy community, how do you pick your focus and how do you know that's going to resonate with consumers?
Yeah, again, we always look at what the data is showing us. And I will say to your earlier question, for what we see with consumers is that animal care and taking care of the land and taking care of the farm are inextricably linked. So if we're showing stories of you all taking good care of your animals and good care for the land, that's a plus win for us in terms of raising that belief and trust with the consumer. So we really look at the data that guides us. We also look at what thought leaders are talking about in the space to say what are they advocating for, or what are they speaking to media about in terms of importance when we think about this broad topic of environmental sustainability. And that tends to be reductions in methane. It tends to be reductions in GHG emissions overall, as well as water conservation. So we take those two data sets and we say, here's what the thought leader and the media community is talking about that consumers may be seeing in their social channels and or their own media channels. And how do we then create that content that shows the progress that's already happening today on dairy farms across the country, so that we can increase their belief. And they just, I always say consumers just want that reassurance that their favorite dairy foods are produced with care. And we have a great story to tell. And we've seen time and time again when we're putting farmers front and center and you all sharing your story with a consumer or a thought leader audience, it truly does resonate and we can see those perception scores increase.
So as you know, we have a on-site learning center on our farm, and it
Mhm.
is, you're 100% right. People actually will come in and essentially ask for permission to enjoy dairy again because
Absolutely.
of exactly why you just said, the greenhouse emissions and things that they hear about dairy. So, absolutely. And when you're looking at what kind of messaging needs to be crafted, you mentioned all the great work that farmers are already doing. How do you mix that with kind of that continuous improvement mindset that we as farmers all have? There's a lot of things we're already doing and you are sharing about, but what makes you pick specific messaging to make sure that it demonstrates that continuous improvement as
I
well?
think the messages that we find that resonate the most, one of the things, is that a farmer is more than just a farmer, right? A farmer is a climatologist, right? Because you're looking at the weather, you're evaluating a climate, a farmer is working closely with veterinarians and others, your service providers to really look for the ways in which we can continue to improve. And I think that is the one message that we've said, consumers don't expect perfection. What they do want to see is continuous progress. And as long as we are being able to say, here's where we are today with the practices that we're using, whether that's, one of the things that consumers have found surprising is the use of byproducts in animal feed, right? So taking what would go to a landfill, i.e. almond hulls, citrus pulps, whatever it is that you all are using locally, and putting that in with the animal feed and preventing it from going to landfill, that's been a really solid and easily understood. I would say that is the other thing. Climate change can be really hard to understand in terms of the technologies and practices, but when we're able to bring it down to something easily understood that creates that emotional connection that gives them that aha moment, that has been the power of our consumer messaging as well as our thought leader messaging. It is, here's the action that's happening today, here's the proof of the progress, and here's where we're going as an industry together going forward.
Kind of based off of the direction consumers are going and the questions they're asking, very consumer driven.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, we get a lot of questions, we get a lot of data. And again, it's those key time and time again, what we hear from them is, how are farmers conserving water? How are farmers, what about this thing called cow farts, cow burps? That is something that we see a lot of, and just even clarifying for them where enteric methane comes from. We actually did a Time magazine partnership last fall or last summer that was all about water conservation, and it performed extremely well. Time magazine is something that actually surprised me that Gen Z, it's a favorite publication of Gen Z. They like to go in depth on certain topics that they have questions and concerns about. And so being able to work with them to showcase the ways in which farmers across the country, and it's such a regional issue, right?
Mhm.
In terms of where you live in the country and the water conservation or water quality issues, but being able to show the depth and breadth of the practices that are happening on farms across the country, that was a really positive, strong piece for us in the marketplace.
And that's a good point. What we're doing in Ohio may not be top of mind for folks in Texas, for example. So it sounds like you really craft your messaging to encompass a wide variety and a wide range, meet everything.
Yeah, and that's where we really work hand in glove or hand in hand with our state and regional marketing and communications teams they have the best understanding of what's happening locally and the farms and the stories that are, of stories of progress dependent upon the concerns and questions of the consumers in their region. So we work with them to, one, elevate those stories of progress nationally to use in our national creative and execution, but they are then working to make sure that those stories are getting out to those consumers in those markets through digital and social channels. And so it's a really nice partnership that we have to ensure that we're touching upon the regionality and localization and customization of the content while we then elevate stories at that national level.
So you mentioned Gen Z and Time Magazine. So, we're getting a little bit at a look at who your audience is. Can you tell us a little bit more of who you're targeting? And, some of us may not know exactly who the Gen Z community is. So if you can dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so we have for the sustainability stories, we have two kind of core audiences, I would say. One is that sustainability thought leader. So think about those heads of sustainability in food service brands or consumer brand companies, Nestle, Starbucks, et cetera, those people who are leading sustainability efforts where dairy is a big part of their menu and their supply chain. Think about academics and professors of sustainability, as well as then influential reporters and those heads of associations like World Wildlife Federation or Environmental Defense Fund. So we have a very core set of content and execution with those audiences. And then on the consumer side, we also work what we call those eco-conscious Gen Z and young millennials in terms of Gen Z, they're that 18 to 34 range. We really see amongst 18 to 24. That's where a lot of the skepticism exists in terms of what dairy as an industry is doing when it comes to environmental sustainability. So we really try to hone in on that audience specifically. And then with early parents, they trust the industry implicitly. They just have a few questions that they want to get answered. So think about mom wanting to make sure that the products, the dairy foods that she's feeding her kids are produced in a way that is sustainable. So those tend to be the core audiences that we're going after and trying to reach them through either digital, social media, as well as on the case of the thought leader side, last year we did run some high profile print ads, which I know MVP Dairy, thank you very much, was a part of for our execution last year. And so that included USA Today, Washington Post. We actually showed up at a very surprising place last fall, Wired Magazine. Who would have thought that US dairy industry would be speaking about breakthrough technology in the form of manure in Wired Magazine, which is an unusual place for us to show up, but it is intended to give everybody a kind of a surprising way of thinking about inspiring them to think differently about dairy and our role in environmental sustainability.
Yeah, it was fun to be a part of the campaign last spring. And, I remember some conversations back and forth on picking the right kind of image to make sure that it's encouraging people to see dairy differently. And collectively, the dairy community has been talking about sustainability on their farms now for at least probably the last couple decades. How is this campaign and the imagery that you're striving to use, how is that different from what has been done in the past?
We always say internally that, how do we move consumers away from the traditional red barn cows and pasture, right? That there in that still is farming around the country in certain regions, and we should be proud to showcase that. We should also be proud to showcase how the industry and how farms continue to evolve and grow and innovate. And one of the things that we were very cognizant of in going into the See Dairy Differently campaign, when we were thinking about the creative execution of it, is what is that surprising? I did not anticipate that from US Dairy, or I did not anticipate that a dairy farm could look like that, or I did not anticipate that there would be these practices happening across the dairy industry. So our creative look and feel is something that's intended to stop people in their tracks with bold visuals, with clean white space, but also to your point, that shows, wow, that's a dairy farm. I didn't really think about that, right? or I didn't think a dairy farm could look like that. So it is really challenging. I would almost say stereotypes of what dairy farming looks like in consumers and thought leaders' minds, and showing them a surprising side of it that they had not expected.
For those that are listening that haven't been able to see any of these ads, if I'm remembering right, one of them actually featured a pile of cow poop, right?
Yes. Yes.
Stopping them in their tracks, I'm sure that might have been one that might have caught the average consumer a little bit off their tracks of why is there cow manure in my magazine? Um, how have the results and the response from some of these ads, how have the results been?
It has been extremely positive. I get to your point, that was the Wired ad that you spoke of. And had you asked me 2 years ago if we would be in a spot as an industry to be placing a full page ad in a high profile magazine about cow poop, I would have said, what? No. But it has, even just that tongue in cheek of speaking about cow manure as groundbreaking technology. People have appreciated the sense of humor. They've appreciated the surprising look in talking about, the other full page ad that we did with the Washington Post had just a beautiful image of a cow, in looking at the camera like this, and it talked about cow power equaling horsepower, and people were like, "Huh, that's interesting." So it's been positively received. I think by the intended end audiences as well as the industry, for standing tall in some of these high profile publications for the work that we are all doing. We've seen a lot of then positive reaction with the digital content that we've put out through social channels. I think that the key average that we look at is it enticing people to click back? We always want to entice people to click back to learn more. And by that, I mean either clicking through to usdairy.com, clicking through to another one of our state and regional sites to learn more. And we've seen time and time again that the content is inspiring them to do exactly that. I want to say we've had, over 200,000 clicks back to content where they can learn more. And once they are going back to the websites or they're going to the other areas, a media article, for example, they're spending significant time on that site reading through the information. So that just shows us that there's an interest in learning more. And if we have the right content for them to learn more, they're engaging with it in different ways.
USA Today, Time Magazine, Wired, these are not necessarily your traditional farmer magazines. In our industry, we all tend to like to amplify or support what information is being put out. How, as dairy farmers, can we amplify or be part of this campaign?
I think a couple of things come to my mind. One, first and foremost, the biggest thing that I would encourage all dairy farmers to do is to find ways to tell your story locally and work with your state and regional teams to do that. It is, yes, amplification of content that we put out there, but the biggest thing that we see time and time again, and you have said with your visitor center, is you all telling your story to local consumers, local media, local thought leaders. That's the power that we need to scale the impact when we think about building dairy's reputation and building trust and continuing to build that with consumers. I think on our side, when we have a strong piece of earned media content, for example, or this Time Magazine media partnership, or some of the things that the state and regions do locally, making sure that you all are aware of it, right? So that, to your point, if you have a social channel and you want to be able to amplify it, that is something that we're looking to continue to increase our efforts working with our farmer relations teams on, so that as something is earned. For example, I would say we had an article last year in Green Biz, again, another unsuspecting place for US dairy to be. That was something that we amplified and made sure that it got additional scale and reach. Your point is well taken on how do we make sure that we're working then to get that to all of you as dairy farmers, so that if you want to share it, you have that ability to do so. So note taken for me in terms of activations for this year, and working closely with our state and region teams to make sure that we are sharing those content articles with you so that you can all amplify those as well.
That's really good to hear because I'll be on the lookout for those. Um, This is still a relatively new campaign for the dairy community. Where do you see the See Dairy Differently campaign going in the future? And will it evolve beyond a lot of the print ads we're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I am really excited to see where we take it this year. We've already seen we're working towards new creative executions for this year related to telling dairy's environmental sustainability story and featuring that in creative and fun ways. I would also say we're looking at this idea of seeing dairy differently from a nutritional and wellness standpoint. So a lot of work has gone in over the last year through research to look at what is dairy's role in modern health and wellness areas that consumers care about. So gut health, cognition, graceful aging, as we call it. And there's a lot of great science out there that shows dairy's role in some of these modern wellness territories where consumers are wanting to explore. And so one of the ideas that we've kicked around, because when we came up with See Dairy Differently, I was very keen on making sure that it was a concept that could extend beyond environment sustainability. So how do I get a consumer or a thought leader to think about dairy differently in the context of its ability for gut health, right? There's a myth out there that dairy causes gut inflammation or it causes digestive issues, when in reality, the science shows that it actually benefits gut health. So can we take See Dairy Differently and have inspire consumers and others to think about dairy in a different light when it comes to a food that they could consume to benefit their health and wellness long term? So that is something that we're exploring this year in terms of what is that nutritional wellness angle to See Dairy Differently. So more to come on that. And then I think continuing to work with our state and regional teams to identify maybe some high profile ways that we could execute See Dairy Differently together, either experiential and or other activations. I would say See Dairy Differently will come to life at Green Biz Verge, which is a big sustainability conference each year held out in California. We had an activation last year, a bigger booth presence, and I will say, lines were out the door. We actually brought a couple of dairy farmers to talk to people at Green Biz Verge, and I felt bad because the lines were really long to talk to the dairy farmers that we brought. So more to come on that. But again, it's showing up in those unexpected places where people don't expect dairy to be. And then having a conversation and being able to share the work that's happening on farms across the country.
I look forward to watching all this unfold, and I really hope to see continued success with that campaign. But before we wrap up, Heather, is there anything more that you'd like to share that you want to just ensure that our listeners, our dairy farmer listeners today, make sure they hear?
Yeah, I would also highlight, while we have See Dairy Differently, and that's been a great execution for us. Another campaign that I would want to highlight because it's been so successful is we actually last fall targeted those eco-conscious Gen Z consumers with a campaign called A Farmer's More Than a Farmer. And that was branded under the Undeniably Dairy logo. It showed up in streaming Hulu, so streaming platforms, as well as digital channels. And we had a media partnership with Vox, which is a media outlet that's very popular with younger audiences. And we just got the results back from that. It was essentially 3 different executions that featured a dairy farm and farmers out in California, but talked about water conservation, recycling water up to 4 times on average on the majority of dairy farms across the country. It talked about cow feed and nutrition and being able to take care of the cows and ensure that they're well fed. And it also highlighted different technology and practices. In this case, it was a solar field panel that is enabling us to continue to find new ways of energy to power dairy farms. And those simple executions, it was phenomenal to see that amongst consumers who saw the creative, their perceptions of dairy increased across a number of different metrics by 5 to 11 points. So it just shows, again, taking a simple story, making sure that we put farmers front and center in the creative to tell your story really truly works. And it was so successful that we're looking at how do we run that campaign again next month for Earth Month. So that'll be an exciting execution. I will also say stay tuned. We have a brand new partnership, that a creative storytelling project that we are launching with Milk Pep in April, that will feature prominent celebrity talent. And we had that celebrity talent go visit a dairy farm for a week in New York. And so she learned all about dairy farming sustainability and animal and cow care. She got to visit a processing plant, etc. So that's going to be a really fun 5-part docuseries that will be launching next month, Time to Earth Day, to really engage consumers in the conversation and do so in a way that's fun for them as well. And then I would just continue to highlight, I know sustainability, telling dairy's story, it is not an either or between health and wellness or environment, continues to be a prime focus, working with cultural influencers, social and digital channels. And again, we could not do it without our state and regional partners. So lots of exciting things planned across the year, both nationally and locally, and look forward to sharing the results with all of you.
Heather, I actually do have one more last comment or question for you. And it's really just based on, you mentioned the social influencers, and you mentioned uh all the great work you guys are doing, and of course how that will be working on getting information for dairy farmers to amplify. As we see so many trends change, and you guys spend so much time in crafting, the right strategies and messaging for people. There are several dairy farmers that are already online on social media. Where might we find the latest resources to make sure that our messaging aligns with what you guys are putting out?
Absolutely. So I would encourage every dairy farmer to reach out to your state and regional marketing team. The reason being is that we are working closely together we at the national side will produce what we call our cheat sheets or our resource sheets every April, as well as throughout the year, that says here's messaging that has been tested with consumers, here's content assets, that everyone can be able to utilize if you need those assets, and work hand in hand. I know the state and regional teams also have their messages that they've then customized to their consumers locally. So I think the first step is always reach out to your state and regional team, and they'll be able to then direct every farmer to either the localized content and resources that exist or the national resources that could be utilized too.
Well, thank you, Heather, so much for the conversation today. It's been really interesting to hear about your direction with the Seed Dairy Differently campaign. It's always interesting to hear what Checkoff's doing to tell consumers about the great work that we've got going on our farms. And so in closing, I just want to say thank you for joining us again. And to all the farmers listening today, thank you guys for tuning in. And of course, if you want to hear more about various issues affecting the dairy community, so be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform, including Stitcher, Spotify, or iTunes. And of course, check out our website, thedairycheckoffpodcast.com, for future episodes. Until next time, have a great day.